next session. We're going to look into the future here, and I want to bring back Mr. Joe Mandese. This should be very interesting. So Joe, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, John. And that was a real treat for the Outfront attendees who don't normally get to see the full John Whitfield show that you normally only get to see at the summits. So again, there will be one tomorrow and the next day, the TV and video summit. You won't be able to play golf or have drinks with John, but I'm sure he'll be doing some of that interstitial content. So when we do get to meet in person, I really recommend you travel to one if you haven't already. So we're gonna now switch gears. We're gonna flip over to the 2025 upfront discussion. I just want to remind you who the participants are. So we have David Campanelli, who's the Chief Investment Officer from Horizon Media. We have Carrie Drinkwater, who is the Head of Investments for Mullins Mediahub. We have Tim Hill, who is Head of Integrated Investment for part of the Media Brands, IPG Media Brands Network. Andrew Sandoval, who is the Director of Biddable Media for the Media Kitchen, and that title there should tell you something about this discussion. And then we have Catherine Warburton, who's more recently joined 360i as Chief Investment Officer. And I have a question for you about Facebook boycott in 2025, 2025, I think. But first, let me set the agenda here, set the stage a little bit. So the good news is it's been a couple of years since Bristol Myers Tesla has successfully created the vaccine to fight COVID-19 virus. And thankfully, we've all developed herd immunity. And we did have a great Outfront last year at the Yale Club again. I'm sorry about the breakfast situation, but you know, I can't really speak for the service there. I will say it's unfortunate that COVID-24 has once again forced MediaPost to postpone the physical event. You know, Bill Gates was right about pandemic too. So, you know, it's another question mark for the future. It's been a few months since President Harris has been inaugurated. And we now have Facebook merging with Trump Nation. But that platform only has one advertiser, My Pillow Guy. So that's kind of the background setting the agenda for the 2025-26 upfront discussion. So my first question, I'm going to throw it out to the panel overall, is are we going to have an upfront in 2025? Is this finally the death knell, what happened this year? I'd like to really start with that question because honestly, I've been covering it since 1983 and it still hasn't been answered. So I'll throw it out there. Dave, Carrie, Tim, Andrew, Catherine, I'd like you all to weigh in on that. If we could just start off, will we have an upfront as we know it in 2025-26?
I can start. Can you see me?
I can see you, Carrie.
Okay, I can't see the other panelists. I'll have to fix that. So I will just add, I think, to you're setting the stage also. I hope that in that year we've come a long way in terms of a more diverse group of people representing the upfront, part of the upfront. I hope we're learning a lot from what's been happening. So I hope that is part of the narrative as well. I do think there will be an upfront as long as there are clients and marketers that are still chasing quality, culturally relevant content. It may not be as much money, but I think the demand from premium advertisers, again, looking for brand awareness, will still be there.
Okay.
I think that you have to think about what the intention of upfront is. So the intention of upfront is advanced purchase to get a benefit, right? I think that will definitely be with us, to Carrie's point, for the inventory that you're worried won't be there or won't be there at the price, the preferred price if they're a major partner for you. But the upfront as we know it, like the upfront from the beginning of the upfront until the past couple of years, I think it has had evolved into something that was not necessarily the best when you looked at a client by client basis. And I'm hoping that the upfront of the future will be more focused on the clients rather than the marketplace and the agencies.
Tim, Andrew?
From my perspective, I agree. I think there's still going to be an upfront, but I think it'll be much smaller. I don't think as many clients will participate, and the flexibility that we talk about within kind of negotiation will be generated to some degree in the negotiation, but there will be some clients that just want more flexibility than the upfront can provide. And so those clients may decide to opt out, making it just a smaller marketplace.
I'd also add the additional benefit of the upfront, not just in locking in what theoretically should be the most efficient pricing, but also locking in a price is valuable to advertisers too, so they know what that fixed cost is for a large percentage of their media throughout the year, and that's not going to be a variable that goes up or down on them, is also important. So again, that nature of buying ahead of time, that will continue. When I think upfront, I still, generally speaking, think TV upfront, and I think, you know, in 2025, that'll very much be the term will apply to different media types and a much more holistic approach in the upfront, not just really focusing on television as the main driver of it. Because 5 years from now, you know, the state of linear TV will certainly be even worse off than it is right now in terms of available ratings to buy.
Okay, well, I'd like to follow up on a couple of those answers. They were very good, by the way. And I want to break it down into 2 points. One was Catherine Warburton's observation that it's all about securing programming in advance. So the upfront originally began when, you know, it was in the days of program sponsorships, and there were network development meetings. And then the networks began to splinter those opportunities into commercial units for 60s and 30s. More networks came along, and before you knew it, we had this entire supply of GRPs being peddled against scheduled program developed. But it really started to emerge into an allocation market at some point where the networks had the supply, and they would ask the agencies to register their budgets, they would count the house, and they would allocate inventory and pricing. And I was shocked 6 years ago when I participated in MediaPost 2019-20 Outfront to hear that agencies still registered their budgets. So to the extent that we have an upfront going on in 2025, are agencies registering their budgets with the networks, and why?
So in any kind of advanced deal, whether we're purchasing TV inventory, or let's say I'm buying, you know, paper goods or chemicals or something to that effect, you have to let the person that you're negotiating with have an idea of what the demand is. But the difference between that and what the upfront has been prior to this, to your point, Joe, you know, the networks counted the house, and that put us as negotiators, as agencies, at a disadvantage. I think that in upfront 1920, they're not going to be able to count the house because the money is not all coming in at the exact same time. And it's going to become more challenging for the seller. So the seller is going to have to figure out a way to move forward and negotiate without the counting of the house across all advertisers.
Anyone else on that? Because I've always been confused about how as an industry we partition everything around. We're almost co-conspirators in creating this sense of scarcity around upfront inventory and demand. I'm amazed how long it's kept itself. I was surprised to see in the ANA's transformation document that they focused on the calendar year buys and the number of quarters you can buy, and terms like transparency, but didn't get into the nitty gritty of the market dynamics. And, you I think Catherine kind of answered that, but I'd really like to get from the rest of the panel why you need to tell your suppliers how much you demand them when you're in a multimedia marketplace where you can move inventory against a multitude of network options.
So it's a great question, Joe. I mean, it's a terrible dynamic, I agree, but I do understand that if they were then to say yes to all, they wouldn't have the inventory, it wouldn't be available. So then they're making a false promise the other way. So again, I'm not talking overall marketplace, but I'm just saying for very specific, for specific programs, or again, the quantity of high quality, I guess, for lack of using the same words. But if they took all the automotive money that suddenly said yes, they wouldn't be able to accommodate it in a way that was promised. So I guess it's fulfilling the promise of the investment. But I agree, to be able to count the house then takes all the power away. So to Catherine's point, I think this new world that we're living in will change those dynamics. But again, I never want to recommend an investment and then have a network say we can't fulfill it because we had too much or whatever it may be.
Also, it's to me, it's not the fact that we register budgets, it's how the marketplace has evolved over the years so that when we are registering budgets, we're doing it in one, a very tight time frame, and two, decades ago, the marketplace on the agency side was much more diverse. There's a lot more agencies, and as consolidation happened, now there's just a handful of calls that the network needs to make, and they've counted the house. So we've evolved to this point where we are all in the same game, where we're registering at roughly the same time, and kind of, I was saying, giving it up to the networks, because we're not registering on a client-by-client basis. We're not registering, early for one, late for another. We're all just coming to market, not only as an agency, but most agencies coming to get registering at the same time, which has absolutely played into the hands of the networks and something that we're all guilty of. But having said that, you have to register your budgets, whether that's a client or an agency. And if you're looking at it on a client-by-client basis, part of what we're negotiating is what we're buying and how much we're spending, and how attractive that is to the network allows us to exchange those elements for price elements and other advantages from the network. So we can't do it if we don't register budgets. But how we go about registering budgets, which is under our control, no one's forcing us to register the way we have over the past decade or so. And this year we've kind of been forced to a different way to approach the market, which I agree, I think Catherine said it earlier, is going to benefit the buy side in that we're going to do it more individual client based over an extended period of time, where we're all not just slave to this, couple of week period where all the negotiating gets done, and usually, that's to the advantage of the networks versus the buying side.
So David, you described the classic stampede the market scenario. And in years past, when I started out, we're coming up on 4th of July weekend. I was told that you had to wrap up by 4th of July weekend so people could go on their vacations. My question is, have we been too in lockstep, the buy side and the sell side? And are people too concerned with the relationships that exist where, you have to take care of each other? And is that starting to change now because of the crises that are going on?
I don't think it's about relationship. I mean, the whole industry is about relationships, but I don't think the rush to market is about relationships. I think it mostly has to do with the consolidation, both on the network side and on the agency side. There's just so few big players now that, what used to take 20 conversations with 20 different agencies, now 5 different conversations. And same thing on the network side. You talk to Disney and NBC and now CBS, Viacom, and a few others, and that's whatever it is, 75, 80% of the marketplace. So I think that's been the biggest contributor to it over time, and we've all kind of, played into it, I would say. So I don't think it's really relationship based or need I don't feel any obligations to take care of networks. So I don't know, that's just my read on it.
Okay. All right, so I want to switch gears here a little bit. I want to stay on this topic, but it seems to me there's a whole nother concurrent market that takes place around media buying called biddable media. And we're starting to see it seep into national TV, certainly with the beginning of programmatic TV, connected TV, OTT markets. So I'd actually like to hear Andrew weigh in a little bit about how he views this coming from that side of the business. And how do you make sense of a marketplace where the demand side provides all the intelligence to the supply side? And why wouldn't we just create an auction-based market around this?
I mean, I would hope so. In the future, that it would just become more and more increasingly programmatic and auction-based. I think that's been kind of the moves of, I mean, as you guys were kind of speaking previously in the last few answers, I mean, there's always all these corollaries as every piece of media is kind of turned programmatic. Things that we used to transact on directly and through guaranteed relationships, upfront relationships, it all kind of falls, slowly more and more programmatic and more auction based. And I think when I think of like the next 5 years and where things are going, and even my role in the last few years, I mean, 5 years ago, I wasn't buying TV. I think maybe like a little bit if it slipped onto a TV screen. But obviously now that's completely changed. In 5 years, I'm wondering, is my role mostly going to be buying, video on TV screens? As the TV has just become another screen for auction-based media buying. In terms of like, how does that play into, upfronts and guaranteed buys? I mean, there's still guaranteed programmatic buys. There's still upfront things that people want to invest in. I think kind of like that's never going to go away to some extent because of the points that you guys raised earlier. Whether it's locking in pricing, getting the lowest prices you can by buying upfront. I think there's always going to be reasons why those are going to exist, but I'm hoping more and more that as dollars become more fluid, as the consolidation that happens, the kind of advertisers that are looking to buy to lock in investment, large awareness buyers, as the kind of the rest of the pool keeps getting bigger and bigger, who wants to transact on very specific audiences, very specific moments. As that kind of piece of the pie grows, I think I'm thinking, that's where the auction-based buying is gonna excel, and that's gonna be, hopefully what I'm gonna be spending most of my time doing in the next 5 years.
Okay. Well, I'm just curious if what any other traditional buyers think about moving to a biddable auction-based upfront marketplace. Anybody want to weigh in on that?
Yeah,
5 years.
I think it's a natural progression. To Andrew's point, the screen, it might be a TV screen, but it is addressable to the TV screen. And in terms of a transaction model, it's probably a better transaction model than what we currently have. The problem with it is the established base pricing for different clients. So the clients that have the very best pricing will want to keep that very best pricing. And would they be able to maintain that possibly through a PMPA? But if you look at how the fragmentation of the viewers, we're following those viewers, but there's also the whole business of that transaction and maintaining that transaction at the media owner as well as at the agency and the work that goes into it. So something that is more automated is better, in my opinion, for both parties, as well as for the advertiser, because you'll get closer to anything that's addressable. You're going to get closer to the consumer.
So I'll give a little alternative opinion. I think a percentage of our business will be there. I think to Andrew's point, to Catherine's point, I think that is a more efficient, effective way to reach a user at the right time at the right price. I do think, though, that it is not all about the user and the cheap price. I think it also has to be about the environment, it has to be about the content, it has to be about the experience. And so there needs to be that, I believe there's this truly creative element in our business still, and that people are watching and that you want to be a part of. And I don't think that part will be this biddable transacted media. Again, I think a portion of it will go there because there's such tonnage and because, again, we just need to get people at the time. But I think that, again, this advertising world, this brand awareness that we all seek will continue to have its place in our investment strategies.
Let me swing it in another direction, which is, I often wonder if we could structure these deals. Why, back in 1999, 2000, I remember writing about Enron moving into the media industry with Media Services Division, Enron, the energy corporation. And just before they folded, they had structured a 5-year forward deal. I believe it was NBC, they never disclosed it, with some big advertisers. And the idea there was the same as the Upfront. It's all about securing long-term commitments to quality programming and audience delivery, right? Now, as well as I do that the network schedule announced this month is going to change by the time September, October, November come around. So you're being guaranteed against promises and delivery anyway. So why can't we structure, whether it's an auction-based, programmatic, or negotiated deal, if the real goal is to secure long-term commitments to quality inventory, why are we only doing it once a year, or why are we doing it, as the ANA suggests, a few quarters this year?
I think that's a good question. I mean, I think there are advertisers that are more comfortable doing longer type commitments. I mean, I think from the Enron example that you give, obviously they weren't able to fulfill a longer term commitment like that. But there are definitely advertisers that can look at partnership like that. And I think they really do look at it as partnership as opposed to just securing the price. And there are other elements to that type of kind of deal that come into play. But I do also think it's having the confidence in the partners and the right types of partners. Will they have enough in their portfolio that you're going to want to build around, and do you believe in that? And I think obviously the biggest example that comes to mind on something like that are the folks that have sports programming that's been a little bit more immune to some of the challenges of kind of linear television. But I do think that there's a limited kind of group that can do that, but I do think that it's something that they can potentially look at creating longer term partnerships.
And the other side is, I agree with Tim, we have a handful of advertisers who do think in terms of more than a year, and in the sports world, more than 50% of the deals networks do are multi-year deals. But the flip side is most of our advertisers want more flexibility in the next 12 months out of this upfront, or I'm sorry, I forgot we're in 2025. They're going to want it in 2025 as well. If we need more flexibility for 12 months, how are we committing to 24 months or 36 months? I think those that can think longer term should get discernible benefits from networks for that. But I'd say still a majority of advertisers are still looking at probably less than 12-month terms in length of what they're willing to commit.
I agree with Carrie that there still is that room for the creativity, and that creativity is where you'll do your direct partnerships, whether it's in TV or digital. But I think that mass everyday spots and dots buying, there's no reason why it couldn't be transacted in a programmatic fashion, or let's call it an automated fashion.
Yeah, and for sure, you could have things like terms and conditions, options, flexibility, baseline CPMs could all be factored into that programmatically and negotiated. And I know humans don't like when machines do part of their job, but shouldn't you, smart people like you, Catherine, be using your brain for that creative part of the business? Oh, we're going to see more of that in 5 years. Okay. I think Catherine got muted maybe.
I just said hopefully.
Okay.
I think that more, as I said, I think more automation will help both sides. And to Carrie's point, though, there's still creativity. And if we lose sight of creativity, then it's not really media the way we know it. It's more of like a commodity.
So I kind of want to pose a question here and get your sense of where we're going to be in 5 years about this dichotomy between, how should I say it, complete auction versus complete premium direct deal making. So I wrote a column that published this weekend about the Facebook boycott, pointing out that only 6% of the top 100 advertisers only represent about 6% of Facebook's revenues. And Dave Morgan liked that, he retweeted it, but he pushed back and he said, yeah, but that's enough pressure to put pressure on the auction markets for Facebook. And I haven't had a chance to report or dig into that deeper, but my view was a lot of those top 100 advertisers are doing direct deals. They're not doing auction-based deals with Facebook. So what I really want to get a sense from, to the extent all of you could talk about it, Andrew in particular, are we going to move to a world where it's more direct negotiating supported by automation and technology and data, or more automation making smarter real-time decisions? And I'm talking specifically about premium inventory that we would call the upfront.
So you specifically about premium inventory. I mean, I think it's still the negotiation led. We're talking about real premium inventory, at least to a certain extent, at least until a point of basically inventory running out or inventory being available. In the example you mentioned, I mean, I was thinking about Facebook and the 6% and everything. I mean, I think there are definitely pressures to influence auctions there because of the way that 6% is buying. A lot of the brands that are buying or that are pulling out or are saying they're taking part in the boycott, they're not DR. They're not a lot of DR advertisers. They're doing reach and awareness plays right now. So they're influencing a lot of different auctions and buys by basically being a part of all the auctions in a lot of ways because they're casting such a wide net. I think that's why I do think there's a point there where when those dollars start coming out, auction dynamics do start dropping pretty quickly. And I think that's also why earlier this year, when COVID first kind of fired up and dollars were coming out of Facebook, CPMs came down quite a bit. I think it was the same effect. A lot of those, it was a lot of branding. There's a lot of it was a lot of those dollars coming out of the marketplace, kind of driving auction dynamics. So I guess going back to, I think there's always, those are the dollars that are going to be directly negotiating for premium placements. If they come out of the marketplace, then I do think there's going to be more reliance on basically the other 94%, which is strongly reliant on automation, audience-based buying. I mean, a lot of that's simply remarketing and and kind of just strict audience-based hitting audiences, which Facebook is obviously right for.
Okay. By the way, I don't see any questions coming through the chat window. So remember, if you have a question for the panel, I mean, here's your opportunity to understand how the Dow will be 5 years from now, or what Trump nation stock will be trading at, or anything about pandemics, because these people are living in the future, literally. But I just want to follow up on this kind of last thread, and then we'll move back to more of a normal conversation. But, the ANA in their document said they wanted more transparency. They didn't define it, as Wayne Friedman said. We always hear that word. But the reality is, what I've observed is that we're moving in the other direction, opacity. So when programmatic trading started out, it was largely open, RTB, and the data was highly visible. Then we went through a period where we moved increasingly into private markets and direct deal making. And just a week or so ago, I did a story with Andrew about the ABM asking the ad industry to restrict the use of auction data in programmatic trading from third-party processors. The DMPs and the SPs and all those guys who create value for markets for a lot of reasons. And I don't know how that'll net out. But I'm thinking we're now in the first stages of seeing this kind of data being unlocked in auction markets for what we would call television, connected TV, OTT, et cetera. And if we move in that direction, there's actually less transparency about what's happening in the market. And I'd like all of you to weigh in on that. Actually, maybe Andrew, you don't even lead off on this one. Why would we not want as much open market data available? Are we steeped in that culture of allocating budgets and letting the sell side supply to us?
So I'll go first, Joe. So in the traditional linear TV marketplace, while you pointed out some problems with those transactions, one of the problems was not transparency, because we knew exactly where our advertiser ended up running. We were told beforehand where it ran, where it was going to run. Even if your unit was preempted, you had the choice to move or not to move. And after the fact, we received, an invoice with every single spot. We could tie it back to the program that the advertiser advertised in. Now, in the digital world, and even in the CTV world, we don't have that level of transparency. And, even with partners and great valued partners like a Hulu, you don't know where your content was served, what the content was that you were served in. And granted, it's a different type of transaction where you're going after the person rather than the program, but why can't you have both, right? So I think that we need to increase the level of transparency. We need to keep as much transparency as we can while recognizing privacy issues, right? We want to be respectful of people's privacy, but I think that there needs to be increased visibility into the content where our ads are served.
Yeah, I will say, I totally agree with you, Catherine. As a personal experience, I was recently in COVID watching, I won't say what partner, but a quality CTV partner, and I saw the same ad 10 times for a product I already own. So I don't even need the product. And so this level of transparency and frequency, we keep talking about it. And again, even if it is the right person and it's the right environment, if the frequency is not managed, again, with all the suppliers, that's a huge issue. And I think there, and again, we're in the future, so I think there will be more business guarantees. So I'm okay. I would feel more comfortable not knowing where it aired, but if I had a transaction that resulted from it. So if I can get a business guarantee from quality content, so I feel safe with the supplier, and it resulted in a change in metric for whatever it is I decide, that to me would outweigh the transparency desire for that moment.
Okay, in 5 years, I'm going to hire you as my agency because that's where I want to be. But I just want to push back on this a little bit, and then we can move on. Yes, you know what program your ads ran and sort of, but when I watch MSNBC, I see the same ad repeated over and over and over again. And I have not seen this data in some years, but the Broadcast Cable Financial Management Association used to disclose, talk about opacity. They no longer provide it to the press. The last time I saw it, discrepancy resolutions were about 6% of network TV ad buys. They were about 40% of cable TV ad buys. This is a while ago, like over a decade ago. For spot TV, they were all over the place. So the truth is, even when you're dealing with a trusted partner who has these premium, pre-negotiated deals, stuff happens. The same thing is true in a programmatic environment. Stuff happens, but you have the data trails to account for it and resolve the discrepancies and renegotiate if they don't meet the terms of your contract. So my opinion, I think that's a lot of, people use the word transparency a lot, but I think more data makes it more transparent. Less data makes it more opaque. That's just my opinion. In 5 years, are we going to have more data about who saw your ads, when, and what, to Carrie's point, you got for that? Or is it going to be about the same as we have today?
So I'll take just first crack at this because I want to bring up one other thing. I think there's, in 5 years, I'd be excited to get more data and to get, I think a lot of the things that we just talked about are probably because solutions weren't purpose built for the advertising that we're trying to do. You know, the first Roku box wasn't built to serve ads. And now we're kind of getting into this, you know, a new decade. Streaming is going to further proliferate. It's obviously proliferating, and solutions are actually going to be based around, you know, there's ACR chips in TVs. There's actually things that can measure what we want to measure. Kind of pushing back against all that, though, is the wave of privacy that's going to be coming back. Obviously, it's hitting us online with third-party cookies going away and now mobile IDs coming out of iPhones. Well, I don't see why that's going to stop at, you know, the TV, which is potentially even worse when you think of, you know, tying back to household personal data, or even, you know, when you think about location data, it's not moving around. So I think I kind of, I go back and forth on this about the level of data we get at targeting and exactly what that's going to look like in 5 years and from a measurement standpoint. Because if the kind of wave of privacy keeps, you know, this is 5 years from now, but right now it's picking up a lot of steam. You know, it's you know, it could just undo all of the new data we're going to get from the technology kind of catching up.
Certainly, the CPCA. Go ahead.
I think it's interesting, you know, since we're 5 years in the future. I mean, like, most of the conversation we're talking about is around the connected TV inventory, where the consumption has been shifting. But, you know, when we're talking about linear television, we're talking about kind of the audience and the products that are out there right now. I think part of the transparency conversation was to how are those products managed and how is that done on a partner by partner basis, because there's not much consistency in how the partners are putting their data driven linear products into market. And I think that's a lot of the frustration and some of the conversation around transparency is around buying audience in a linear fashion, as opposed to some of the transparency around the connected TV, where I think we all would like to get more granular data in terms of what we're actually getting within those buys. But a frustration, you know, really being around when you do a data-driven linear buy, what data is being applied and what is the consistency across the partners. And then just, you know, one point on that overall, I think a lot of that comes to what is the system's capability to actually do a data-driven buy versus doing a pre-planned optimization at a point in time that's not necessarily as addressable in nature as what we'd like to get to. And I think that's a little bit of the disconnect in terms of kind of what exists right now, and when we talk about auction and biddable and linear inventory.
Okay. Well, let's go to some audience Q&A, and remember, we're framing this for 5 years from now, but so to answer this question, both for now, this upfront season, and 5 years from now, what percentage of your upfront media budgets are moving from linear TV to OTT? Anybody?
I mean, I think that's gonna depend on the audience that you're targeting, and then I think there are still a lot of advertisers who are looking at on an age and gender, and that might mean that they have you know, really significant shifts in certain kind of elements of that, and in some cases they might not really be buying linear at all if that's what they're seeing. But I think it's hard to make a complete generalization based on kind of how all over the map clients are.
Yeah, I would say we don't have, I mean, what upfront budgets right now. So if we're talking now, and then in 5 years from now, I would think that OTT would be part of our upfront conversations with our partners. So it becomes part of that sort of, it's the same conversation. So whoever we're discussing with, if we're doing this longer term investment, it includes OTT or some of their, you know, again, who knows who will own who or who will survive then. But I think it becomes, it could become more of a holistic conversation.
And also, I mean, I think it starts with the consumer, right? And how they are choosing to consume their video, whether it's traditional linear or OTT. And we're seeing trends move towards OTT, cord cutting increasing. I'd be shocked if 5 years from now, 50% of the consumption isn't OTT versus linear. So if 50% of the consumption's there, then 50% of your budgets need to be there, you know, roughly speaking. So I think it's going to be over the next 5 years a pretty big sea change. There will be people who will hang on to their linear TV and stay with their linear TV for, you know, forever. But that's going to be much more like 50% of the U.S., not the 80% of the U.S. or 70% of the U.S. it is now.
I agree with Dave that the investment should definitely follow the eyeballs. However, there are some other factors. So OTT by definition is addressable. I think that we're going to start doing planning of video of addressable versus non-addressable. And addressable channels could be prioritized depending on what the goal of that particular campaign is and what the advertiser's trying to achieve. So you might see, to Tim's point, there might be situations where they're not buying TV. The thing that oftentimes people forget is that linear cable TV inventory is dirt cheap on a CPM. Granted, it is not addressable, but it is very, very cost efficient. Other day parts are less cost efficient.
Well, I'd like to come back to that if we have time, but I want to get to some more audience questions. So one of them is, how does diversity allocation of budgets play a role in the upfront? Hey, I was struck last week, Tim's parent, IPG Media Brands, and announced a really interesting set of guidelines of brand protection versus brand responsibility. And it was the first time I saw a media services agency actually put out an ethical statement like that. I hope you live up to it. But, you know, we're talking about all of these issues: data privacy, diversity, and, you know, in the case of Facebook boycotts, that's your agency took a lead, Catherine, on that. You know, stepping up to the plate and trying to make the world a safer place. Can you talk a little bit about how much ethics is playing a role in the 2020 upfront, but also by 2025?
Well, for us as agencies, I think it's a really, really tricky spot in that we are agents for our clients' spending. We're not, it's not really our role to tell them how they should spend their money from an ethical standpoint. But it is our role to advise them on the risks and rewards for where you're going to place their money. So we've you know, done our best to take a approach where we're doing everything we can to educate our clients and consult our clients without you know, certainly not dictating to them based on ethical standards, regardless of what we all might believe. We have a diverse array of clients who don't necessarily believe everything that we within Horizon believe. And there's limits to that. Obviously, we have a code of ethics that we abide by, and we expect our clients to as well. So I'm not referring to extreme situations, but there certainly are gray areas in all of this that that we have to, like I said, really be careful about educating our clients and what's happening in any given situation, like the Facebook situation right now, but also understand where they might be coming from in terms of their positions as well.
Yeah, I think in 2025, the country is going to look a lot different than it does now. So diversity allocations have to be a part of the conversation. I think what's happened this past year will make them be part of the conversations. I think taking off, you know, just personally, I hope everyone has obviously we're all talking about it. It is a question here where I don't think it would have been a question before. So I think, and again, hopefully not just this year, but as we move into the future, it becomes every part of everyone's conversation, and everyone is making decisions based on what we've learned and how we grow.
I think that we as an advertising community had sort of forgotten that our ad dollars enable the media owners, that without those ad dollars, the media owners could not be what they are, right? A long time ago, you would be a sponsor of the program. This is brought to you by and was made possible by that advertiser. And I think that we lost sight of that. And we were very concerned about brand safety, as we still are, and we should be, but it goes beyond brand safety. It goes back to responsibility. And I think that our advertisers, to Dave's point, they hire us for our point of view, and we provide our point of view. And it's obviously their choice how they spend their money. But without our point of view, what's the point of having an agency? And I think that recent events, as Carrie was talking about, are going to dramatically change how media owners operate internally, externally, as well as how media agencies approach the situation.
Well, we had a lot of good questions coming at the end from the chat, but we're running out of time. I just want to end with one quick wrap-up question for all of you, which is, how weird is all of this for you now that we're doing Outfronts via Zoom webinars and that you had to do your virtual upfronts? And specifically, how is this impacting the business going forward? What is the future of your office space and your teams and onboarding and recruiting? What's it going to be like? And, you know, I just want the human side of this from all of you. If you could just weigh in quickly on how strange this is. Is something good going to come out of this? How are you gripping?
I think listen, like, there's been so much disruption that I do think there are good, I mean, the conversation that we have is completely different than the conversation we would have had, you know, at another point in time about an upfront marketplace in general. So I think that's definitely a good thing to have it kind of rethought and everybody thinking that way. I do think from the agency standpoint, being able to expose everybody within the agency to kind of how the process works, I think is a big loss. And I think just being able to onboard talent and really have people join the organization is something that I worry about. And I actually worry about it from the diversity standpoint as well, is, you know, being in that shared space, I think really helps people get exposed to things. And I worry that the longer we're not kind of coming together, we can do it over video, but then there are the side conversations that people get more context to that aren't happening as much right now. So I hope that obviously we'll all be seeing each other in person and being able to pass along all the things that we've been exposed to the next generation.
Yeah, I think it's really weird. And the human side is, I miss human connection. I miss, you know, seeing people. I miss camaraderie. I miss the conversations that happen that aren't planned on a Zoom when you're one-on-one, or you're, you know, bump into someone or you have a meal with someone. So the honest answer is I miss the communication and I miss human connection, but I think we've all evolved as we do. I think it's helped bring agencies to, you know, your agency across country, different offices together. I think it opens up people to live in other places that it wasn't always a possibility. So we could get some unique talent that, again, can help us make more diverse as we move forward.
I think I ran over, and I'd love to hear all your responses, but I need to throw this over to Steve Smith for the roundtables. I want to thank you all for participating. We kept these a little shorter than the normal panel discussions, but thank you for participating.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, panel.